Hey guys, Luma02, doing a video recording of the Canadian Highlander format, and this deck that you have in front of you. So, I'm going to be doing a deck tech and theory of play with this deck, which is Izzet Tempo, or Blue-Red Tempo. If you are only interested in watching gameplay, please go to the comment section and look at the timestamps as well. This is Canadian Highlander, so it's 100-card singleton format, with no ban list, but a points list to govern the volume of the quote-unquote broken cards that you can play in one deck. That said, let's jump into it. So, as far as points go, Canadian Highlander, of course, Dig Through Time, Ancestral Recall, and Mystical Tutor being a 2-pointer, Ancestral Recall being my 7-pointer, and then Dig Through Time closing me out for the remaining 1 point in the deck. So, Mystical Tutor is kind of an interesting one in this deck. I think the card gets more and more busted the more unfair you go with it. So I tend to like it best in decks that use it to win all at once. Given that I have included it in this deck, I think more often than not, one of the things that you want to have as a payoff, especially as a two-color deck, because in general when you go to two colors, you do get a little less range against what you're good at, as opposed to going like Jeskai Tempo or like Jeskai Aggro Control. You want to have the ability to win, though. So I'm playing Price of Progress in this deck, which is kind of an interesting include. I am running some non-basics as well, but primarily we're relying upon basic lands to cast our spells. In this deck, there's only two tutorable dual lands in the deck. That's Volk and Steam Vents, despite the high land tutor count. So Price of Progress was kind of like an include that I was like, if I'm going to play Mystical, I want to be able to just kill folks with Mystical. So, Mystical commonly is going to get either Price of Progress, Ancestral Recall, in some cases I've gotten Dig Through Time, or Force of Will, or Pact of Negation at this point as well. So this is a Tempo deck. A Tempo or Aggro Control deck, as I like to call them. I think the distinguishment between the two is actually fairly low. Most folks would say like Death and Taxes is more of an Aggro Control deck because it doesn't have counter spells. I don't know. To me, they're very similar in how they operate. Death and Taxes operates a lot more in the negative, like it has a lot of cards. It utilizes mulligan decisions to get after cards that are specific to matchups, so that essentially it can counter spells with cards that also attack. So it's kind of in a way like virtual card advantage, because your creatures that attack counter spells. Now, that's in Death and Taxes. In this deck, I'm literally countering spells. I have counter spells in the deck. I think one of the things that makes... one of the easy ways to distinguish an Izzet deck, a blue-red deck, between, like, Blue-Red Moon, Izzet Blitz, and then, like, Izzet Midrange or Izzet Tempo, is kind of how I have the deck broken down right now. So, before I jump into the actual card selection, I'm going to highlight some piles. This is my permission pile right here that I just highlighted. And you'll note there are some cards that are flexible, like Izzet Charm is a flexible card. It can be removal, it can be dig. Archmage's Charm, it can be card draw, it can be a counter spell if need be. It can also steal a permanent with 1 converted mana cost or less, which is actually very relevant. Steals like Dark Depths, Merit Lage, tokens. It steals a lot of different stuff, and it's quite good. This other pile over here, you're going to see that I have my selection and card drawing, and then this pile right here, I have my threats. Now, what's a little bit lower in this deck is the removal. So one of the things that I think makes a deck, or allows you to distinguish a tempo / midrange build of blue-red from like Blue-Red Moon and like Izzet Blitz is realistically the piles of your threats, card draw and or selection, and answer cards should be fairly close to equivalent. The one thing that this Tempo deck has, in addition to its answer cards over here, is this variety burn / removal area. Because a lot of this can go to face, these cards are highly flexible. When you're building these decks, obviously, you're limited to 100 cards. I guess you can go over, but typically speaking, you don't want to. And a lot of these cards, like for instance, Searing Spear, can go into the threat pile if you want it to be in the threat pile, or it can go into an answer pile if you want it to. So it gives you a little more flexibility than like purely the counter spells or purely the threats. That either impact the board or impact the stack. So they're kind of, in a way, flex spots that can go between both. But at the end of the day, you have a very neutral, very even split of mana, draw, and selection. What makes it a deck of Xerox, or an engine of Xerox deck, is all the selection in this pile right here. And then also even piles of, answers and threats. So, what is the theory of play for this deck? Well, this deck is a tempo deck, so it's going to play a little bit differently in all matchups. The matchups you generally do not want to see are like turbo aggro decks. Very aggressive decks are going to be tougher for this deck to beat, especially monochromatic aggressive decks. But otherwise, it has pretty good game against most other things. It's pretty good against combo because it has efficient, cheap threats that can win the game all on their own, and counter magic to disrupt your opponent's effects, as well as a large swath of selection to ensure that you're drawing the right things at the right time to stop, a combo deck. Tends to be quite good against control as well because all you have to do is land, one threat like a Monastery Swiftspear and just sit there and protect it, or one Delver of Secrets and just protect it. And they're going to be forced to kind of react to that card. And when they're reacting, if you force them to react too early, it tends to cause them to piecemeal their effects, and it makes it very difficult for them to two-spell as a less efficient deck. That said, so you're going to have good range against mid-range, pretty good matchup too. Tempo mirrors, I tend to think, are fun. They're very fun mirrors. I'll show you one game of a tempo mirror versus Rug. And no, I did not win that through Price of Progress. But at the end of the day, it just has a wide range of answers, threats, and selection to kind of either get you in or keep you out of trouble with it. I do think that tempo decks in general tend to be some of the more challenging decks to play. I think typically folks will talk about like Sorensen blue-green tempo, which I think in some ways is probably a little more challenging than blue-red. Because the answers that blue-red has are a little more flexible if you make an oopsie and your opponent develops onto the board something you don't want to have on the board. That said, I do think that blue-red is probably a little more powerful in doing that. You can ask, why not go Rug? Well, I kind of wanted to try out blue-red. I've already built a Rug deck. I believe I have a deck tech up on it. I think I probably could go lower end on Rug tempo. Maybe even go more blitzy with it. But I've been pretty happy with this build, and it's done pretty well for me in most of the matchups that I expect to do well in. Like I said, it does struggle a bit with the aggressive matchups. Some things you could do to kind of temper that: you could put in a Fire Ice if one was so inclined. It's not in here currently. You could also put in Electrolyze if you were inclined to do that, and it would definitely increase your aggressive matchup percentages. Right now, we're only running the red cards. Like Electrolyze is a lot of mana. It's card advantage, no doubt, but it's kind of slow. And Fire Ice, it's probably worth a nod. Maybe we should try to look to find a space to include it over something else in the deck. That's something possibly I could look at in the future is adding that card right there. Anyways, guys, so relatively thin mana base, so 30 lands. We're running a ton of cantrips, from Gush on down, to ensure that we are hitting our land drops, regularly and in the volume that we require to actually win the game. So as you go over the mana base, 15 basics. We do have, these dual lands here, 2 of which are fetchable to Volk and the Steam Vents. You have a Cascade Bluff, Spire Bluff Canal, and Sulphur Falls, as well as Fiery Inlet, which is in its own pile because it eventually can turn into cards. One of the things you'll notice, I'm only playing 2 actual literal mountains in the deck, despite having a significant number of red cards. And that may seem kind of crazy, but at the end of the day, because you have these 8 fetch lands, plus the 6 duels, plus the 2 red sources, I oftentimes do not find it's an issue to get to 1 to 2 red sources, and generally you only need 1. None of the red cards in this deck require double red mana. Sometimes it'll come up that you want 2 red mana, and it's not, generally speaking, hard to get. I've never lost a game because I just couldn't find red mana. I was like, I can't do anything. I mean, I've lost games where I just couldn't cast my spells. I didn't have enough mana, or I got wastelanded off of mana, and that's a thing. But I've never just solely lost due to mana fixing on this deck. Now, I think over time it'd probably come up, but it hasn't come up, in a decent number of games. We're talking maybe 20 to 30 games. So despite, the belief that Izzet decks or blue-red generally has dog shit, as they call it, mana, I think it's fine. I think it's getting better and better the longer time goes on, and the more cards that we see printed to support it. Prismatic Vista and Fiery Islet were 2 very big gains for a lot of the 2-color decks in the format. And I think, you can probably safely start playing them a little more highly. And it's going to give you some protection against moon effects and back to basics. You may note that I'm also not playing those cards. I'm not playing back to basics, Blood Moon, or Magus of the Moon in this deck. They kind of jump away from what this deck's trying to do. I think those are great cards. I think they're really good in control. builds of this deck because they can just, you can counter all their stuff and then just lock them out, or you can lock them out and then kill all their stuff and then just they never do anything again, and eventually you just randomly win. But this deck's not trying to do that. It's trying to win. In a lot of matchups, you're just going to find those are time walks, and the aggressive matchup is already not great. It's winnable, but it's not great. And I think in general, those cards tend to really, force you to struggle in the aggressive matchups, or against like two-color decks where it's just as much a burden on you as it is on your opponent. So I am not running those, and I think I've been happy without them. I haven't really had a game where I was like, man, if I had those cards, if I had the moon effects, I would really be winning this game. I think oftentimes, it's just not necessary. And due to the fact that it's not the most flexible of answer, because it's very matchup specific, I think it tends to be a hindrance in a deck like Tempo, and it generally tends to mean you become more of a control deck. You just bide time until you can do those things. Okay, so mana base aside, let's go into the removal / interaction / additional threats, because we're treating some of this stuff as burn. You have a Braid. This is actually the only card, I believe, in this pile that does not... Well, there's two cards. There's this card and Stifle. That do not do damage to face. Braid, the reason this is in here is because it's so flexible. It can kill damn near anything. Not everything, but it can kill quite a few things, especially if you combine in, like, an attack from a Young Pyromancer token or a Goblin Rabblemaster or whatever that's been blocked on, like, a 4 toughness thing. It can generally finish it off. And the fact that it can just do 3 damage to any creature, destroy any artifact, means that it does definitely give you it gives you more range against, like, the artifact style decks. Arc Trail. So Fire Ice not in here. Arc Trail does a little more on the burn side. Ice, is really not the half you tend to want to be using in this deck. I suppose, I probably need to reconsider it. Ice definitely can tap things down to allow you to attack through. But right now I'm running Arc Trail. And I'm not sure if that's correct. Maybe it is worth looking at Fire / Ice in the build. I kind of talked that, so maybe that'll be a change I make in the future. Next up, you have Incinerate, just 3 damage to any target, cannot be regenerated. I think that actually came up against a Lotleth Troll, or something like that. I think, it's a Lotleth Troll. Lightning Strike, also a pretty strong card. Lightning Bolt, not getting replaced anytime soon. Forked Bolt, this just, does 2 damage, divided as you choose among 1 or 2 targets. Can just be a shock. To Dome can also be a 2-for-1, which is a pretty strong answer, especially against the aggressive decks. This deck's going to tend to have a tough time with. And against Control or Combo, it just ends up adding clock. Burst Lightning can scale up to be a 4 damage burn spell. At the end of the day, it's just a shock that scales better into the long game. Searing Spear, again, 3 damage to any target. Chain Lightning, 3 damage. Stifle. You can stop fetch lands with this. You can stop Planeswalker ultimates, Planeswalker activations. I think I've stopped Miniamo activations with this. It can do a significant bit. Rings activations can do a significant bit, in a variety of different matchups. Storm triggers, there's quite a bit that Stifle does that definitely makes it, I think, a worthy include over something like Disallow, which I am not running in this deck. Vapor Snag. Against, like, the mid-range decks, this card tends to be a big earner. They get to turn 4 or turn 3, and they cast their 4-drop off a Mana Dork, and you just Vapor Snag it like their Kalitas or whatever. And as long as it's not an ETB creature, you tend to be pretty happy with this. Against the more aggressive decks, sometimes you'll either bide time by using this on their creatures, or you'll protect your own creatures against, like, their solitary removal spell, so you can get it re-resolved, and then win in combat. So I've been pretty happy with all these. I think Fire Ice is definitely worth consideration. And another card that we could look at is Flame Slash, but Flame Slash, Scred, and Magmatic Sinkhole, I forget what the card's name is exactly, but it's a Delve card, does 5 damage to any target, any creature. Or possibly Planeswalker target. Let me check. I'm going to check this card out real fast, guys. This is a card I've considered to Sinkhole. We're going to get 2 cards. We're going to get literal Sinkhole and then this card. 5 damage to target creature or Planeswalker. Actually, Magmatic Sinkhole is probably a card I should be playing in this deck. The reason I was kind of leery of playing it, I didn't know, I had to reread it to see if it did Planeswalkers. The reason I've been leery, though, is that I am running a lot of cards that actually care about the graveyard, to include Spellheart Shimra, Crackling Drake works either way, Enigma Drake, where are you at, buddy? Cryptic Serpent, there you are. You care about it. So there's quite a few cards that actually care. Snapcaster Mage. There's quite a few cards that actually care. Grim Lavamancer. Like, I have Dig Through Time already in the deck. I have Logic Knot in the deck. So there's a lot of cards that really care about the yard. but it could just be incorrect and not be playing Magmatic Sinkhole. The other problem with Magmatic Sinkhole is it really requires some other things to be true. It requires that you're playing its creature deck or Planeswalker deck. If you're playing its like hard combo, Magmatic Sinkhole is just really bad. It's just not a great card. That all said, I mean, I should probably see if I can find room for it. That or maybe Slash or Skred, but Skred's probably not good enough. I mean, if I went to Skred, I would obviously change out the islands and the mountains for snows. But even then, I don't think Skred would be more correct than Flame Slash in this specific build, because I'm not really a landed deck, and I only have 15 basics, and the deck can operate on 2 to 3 lands pretty effectively and win a game. So I think if I were to add anything in the burn/removal pile, it would probably be Magmatic Sinkhole and Nod to Fire Ice as a possibility. That said, I am still a little leery because Delve is kind of an issue for this deck. It's already got a few Delve cards, and it really does want its yard to be intact. Going over threats, we have Crackling Drake, just a good X4 that has power equal to the total number of instant and sorcery cards you own in the exile zone and your graveyard. And you get to draw a card when it comes into play, so it is basically a 2-for-1 automatically, as long as it doesn't get countered, and it's a pretty big beater. It can kill folks very fast. Cryptic Serpent, just a big thing. 6/5 for basically 2 blue mana in this deck is pretty good. Spellheart Shimera. This is only an X3, but it's basically Crackling Drake without card draw, and it doesn't count exile. Enigma Drake, better version of Spellheart Shimera, has 4 toughness, is really the only reason why. So it stays alive through a lot more. Legion Warboss and Goblin Rabblemaster. These are both in here because they're just kind of army in a can cards that you can just resolve, protect, and they'll win the game all on their own. Generally speaking, faster than most other cards in the deck. They don't look like much, but they really do kill people fast. And they go very wide, so they're hard to kind of block out. Vidillion Clique, yep, just good against combo. 3/1 flyer, great threat. Pretty much always happy with Vidillion Clique. Nibble Obstructionist, this is our second Stifle effect if we do require it in the deck. It's also just a 3/1 flyer, basically Vidillion Clique body for flash speed. I've used both halves of it. It's a pretty good card. Snapcaster Mage, yep, I don't think most blue decks do not run Snapcaster. One of the better cards in the deck, one of the better creatures ever printed. Thing in the Ice, yep, this is a great tempo card. Flips their whole board and attacks them with a 7/8. Direfleet Daredevil, and one thing to note with Thing in the Ice is like when you have Snapcasters out, or Direfleet Daredevils, or what are some other decent ones? Even like Crackling Drake to an extent. You can buy back some value with these cards. Even Vidillion Clique, you can buy back some value with them at the same time. And basically just removes your opponent's board and hits them for probably what's half their life total at that point, possibly even lethal. Young Pyromancer, just a go wide strategy card, very cheap, pretty ubiquitous in almost every format that it's legal in. Stormplication Mage, this card's kind of marginal. I don't know how happy I've been with this card. The fact that it has 3 toughness is pretty big. There's a new blue-red card that's 2/2 haste flyer, and it may be better than this, but I don't know. Like, the 3 toughness is really big. It's just hard to kill it. I mean, like, you have to kill it with a bolt. Generally speaking, they have to kill it with a 2-mana spell, or they have to kill it at sorcery speed with something like, Chain Lightning, or Flame Slash, which in general I think tends to make the card better, and it's kind of a dubious prospect to kill it because it has prowess, and if I just cast a spell like a Brainstorm or a Vapor Snag or whatever, it becomes 2/4, and then it doesn't tend to take much damage. You don't just take enough damage to actually kill it. Soulscar Mage, this card is really good at chipping down bigger threats with burn spells, so like 4 and 5 toughness stuff, this thing tends to be pretty good against. The fact that it has prowess means it can attack through quite a bit and trade favorably it's supported by instant speed burn on larger creatures, so just all around a good card. Monastery Swiftspear, just very cheap. I don't think this one's coming out soon. It's just a very cheap threat that can get larger with spells and just kills folks. Grim Lavamancer, a good 2-for-1 creature card, removes, exiles cards from your yard, which is not something that we per se want to be doing all the time because we do have cards that rely on the yard. But the fact that it can just do 2 damage to any target is pretty huge for a single red mana. Terramander, another card that actually cares about the yard. Terramander, 1/1 flyer. Generally speaking, for 1 to 2 mana in this deck, it's going to become a 5/5 flyer, which is pretty big. Delver, just good. Played on turn 1, and generally speaking, it has a pretty high probability of flipping in this deck. As you can see, we have a significant number of non-creature spells and non-land and non-creature spells. It's 11, 18 plus 4. plus 19. I'm not going to do the math. Other is 51, and we will not include Jace and Dak Faden. So taking out Jace and Dak Faden, there are 49 hits for it. It's pretty good. Wandering Fumarole, also a mana resource, but just a threat in the long game. So if everything else ends up dying, you can just fire this thing up. It's kind of more of a mid-rangey threat, but it's just one of those cards that kind of can give you some, like, I don't want to say inevitability, but it's a good last man or last woman standing threat where, like, you know, you blow up all their threats, they blow up all your threats, then it's just like, all right, it's Wandering Fumarole time. Activate it with 2 mana remaining open for counter magic, attack for 4, your turn, you know. And I tend to be happy with the man lands, kind of using them that way, or creature lands. I tend to be very happy using them that way because, you know, it tends to win games pretty effectively. All right, card draw and selection. Ancestral Vision. Ancestral Vision is a little slower. It's more of a controlling card, but this is tempo, so it wants to have the ability to kind of go either way, which in some ways would mean it's more like a mid-range deck. But tempo and mid-range decks can often look fairly similar. This card's slow, right? But I do think it's enough cards that if you get to turn 1 this thing, it's pretty strong. And if you don't, then the chances that you can get rid of it with a Brainstorm, or with a Faithless Looting, or you could pitch to a Force of Will, or a Force of Negation, or Misdirection are pretty high, you know. So I think this card tends to be just fine. Gataxian Probe allows you to generate a plan, but more importantly, it kind of it's a prowess trigger card, you know. But it also allows you to formulate a plan. Like, one time Urza's Glasses for free, well, 2 life, free basically, is still pretty good. Brainstorm, yep, played in every blue deck. Mental Note and Thought Scour are both in this deck. Both allow you to kind of build up your graveyard for a lot of the Delve cards and for the graveyard instant sorceries matter cards inside the deck. Opt, just a very efficient draw card, instant speed, quite good. Ponder, Preordain, yep, I think they're pretty ubiquitous. Serum Visions, not as ubiquitous. And oftentimes in like the Blitz style decks, this card, Serum Visions, comes out specifically. But I think it's just good enough in the Tempo style deck. If you want to end up going more controlling, then Serum Visions can be very strong. And on turn 1, Serum Visions is no slouch. It's pretty good on turn 1 or turn 2. Oftentimes beyond that, you either want to use it really early or really late. But the fact that it's not instant speed, and it also does not put a card that you have chosen into your hand at the point in time at which it's cast, generally tends to make it a little weaker. Sleight of Hand, I like this card quite a bit. I actually think I may like Sleight of Hand in Canadian Highlander in general a little more than I like Serum Visions. Obviously, also not an instant, but the fact that it allows you to get what you're looking for, at least with whatever is in your top 2, right now, tends to be a little better. Faithless Looting, yep, draw, discard. This is card disadvantage, but because we are playing a tempo deck, some of our cards are just not really going to be the most relevant. Like, Price of Progress is not the most relevant at the wrong time or at a bad time. Some of our threats may not be relevant. We may not need like an exceedingly high threat density to win the game we're in. I mean, now if we're playing against an aggressive deck, we're going to want our threat density to be a little higher because we're going to want to be trading off resources. We're going to really want removal. But we're going to want a few more onboard resources to actually trade with our opponent, as opposed to try to fight them on the stack. You definitely don't want to be in a spot where you're fighting an aggressive deck on the stack. You'd prefer to fight them on the board, ideally. Well, at least get board parity and or advantage, and then fight them on the stack. If you're trying to fight them on the stack from a behind position, you're just going to lose the game. And Faithless Looting kind of allows you to kind of filter your draw. That's kind of what's relevant about it. Because Tempo is a strategy whose cards are going to range from being the most relevant thing you can be doing to completely irrelevant. You're going to want to have effects like this. Like, if I'm playing against combo, then the cards that I want to have versus combo are going to be vastly different than the cards that I want against a mid-range deck. I'm probably going to want to burn off some mana dorks, maybe counter some spells against mid-range. And against, combo, like, I'm probably just going to want to counter their spells, land a standalone threat on turn 3 with pitch counter magic backup, and then just never tap out again. So the way the games will play out are going to be a little different, but I'm still essentially playing tempo. I'm just, front-loading my board impact in the mid-range matchup to then establish my board impact through removal. Then I'm going to establish board impact through threat presentation into stack interaction. Whereas against combo, like, I probably just want to stack interact, and my burn spells and removal are probably going to be backloaded, and my threats will still kind of just go right in the middle. I want to still get them down like turn 2 to 3, and establish a clock on them. Latinum's Legacy, again, because we're playing Faithless Looting, a card like Latinum's Legacy is also quite good. It allows you to get rid of worthless stuff, like Price of Progress can be really bad in certain matchups. Sometimes you don't need a Censor, or a Daze, or maybe a Stifle. Vapor Snag, horrendous against control in general. So, you have quite a few cards that, while they're very strong and they're necessary for the deck in certain matchups, can be completely irrelevant in others. And Latinum's Legacy lets you get rid of junk. Jade's Friend's Prodigy buys back cards, tends to get removed very easily. It also allows you to race a little better, but mostly you're just using it to buy back spells. Impulse, find what you need. Charter Course, very good in this deck. This deck has a pretty even split of threats with answers and card selection. So having a card like Charter Course that, this is an attacking deck, you can cast for 2, draw 2 cards. Very good. Dak Vaden, very good against like the artifact style decks, so like your Academy, your Paradox decks, it's not bad against. You can steal like a Rings of Brightheart or something like that. Against like the artifact aggro decks, also not horrendous against them. Card's just strong, and it's also just a filtering engine, which is good. Jace the Mind Sculptor can win the game. Draws you into answers and problems that your opponent, has to deal with. Just a very strong card. Gush actually in this deck may be better than Ancestral Recall. I know that's a stretch to say, but the fact that it can make mana in a mana light deck, generally speaking, what you're going to do is on turn 3, push both your islands back into hand, play a land, and then resolve a Legion Warboss or Goblin Rabblemaster, another 3-drop threat with 1 land on board tapped, and then leave up pitch counter magic to counter whatever their next spell is. I've even done it as late as like turn 4, where you gush, bouncing back 2 lands, put down a land, and then cast your spell and leave up 2 mana for a counter spell. Just a very, very strong card. The fact that it makes mana and draws you cards is pretty big. Ancestral Recall, yep, that's one of our 7-point card. Ancestral Recall wins games. It's a lot of cards. Mystical Tutor, again, selection. Dig Through Time, yep, selection. And really, Mystical Tutor can be whatever you want. I mean, it's perfect selection. It's, well, not perfect. It doesn't get threats, but you can get Price, you can get Ancestral, you can get Dig, you can get Braid if you really need that. You can get Force of Will if you really need that, or Misdirection. It just does quite a bit. Price of Progress, I suppose this can go over in the pseudo burn pile. It's really just a win condition. It's just a way this deck can win, and it's kind of made more available by Mystical Tutor in the deck. Now, as far as permission goes, we have Logic Nut, which is, again, a 2-mana delve spell that counters target spell if a player does not pay X. Force of Will, yep, very good. Misdirection, also very good. Because we're playing a lot of creatures, the chances that our opponents are going to use removal on them is fairly high. And if you're able to misdirect a removal spell onto one of their creatures or one of their permanents, very, very strong. Ionize, yep, again, counter target spell, deals 2 damage to spell's controller. Just does damage for countering a spell. Pardon me. So, basically, it's a shock plus a counter, which is, in my book, probably good enough. Archmage's Charm. I'm kind of just testing this card right now. I don't know if it's good enough. I have, in general, been pretty happy with it, though. It kind of always does something in any matchup that I'm in. I've stolen Merit Lage tokens with it. I've stolen, Soul Rings with it. I've stolen Mana Crypts with it. In general, I've just been pretty happy with how this card's played out. I think I've also stolen an Expedition map with it. Because I didn't want them to be the Academy. Force of Negation, again, more pitch counter magic. Card's good. Censor, not as high on this card, but I'm trying it right now. It is a Force Spike / Daze when you need it to be. Well, it's a Force Spike when you need it to be for 2 mana, and it also cycles to build up your graveyard and, either free up some mana, mana availability for like stuff like Dig Through Time or Logic Knot. Or just gets you deeper into your deck for what you need. Days, yep, we're playing creatures. We like to tap out in this deck. Or we like the ability to tap out in this deck, and having a backup with Days is great. Mana Leak, 2 mana counter. Yep, can't say enough good things about him. Memory Lapse, yep, same story, 2 mana. Miscalc, 2 mana counter plus can cycle. Negate, 2 mana counter again. Remand, 2 mana counter. Counterspell, yep. Mana Drain's probably slightly better than Counterspell, but this is probably one of the best counterspells ever printed. Maybe Force of Will is probably the best, being honest. Alright, Mental Misstep. Yes, very highly impacting card. Pardon me, guys. The more I play Canadian Highlander, the more and more I am kind of set that like Mental Misstep is a correct card to be playing in most blue decks. There's just so many powerful ones, whether it be like Entomb, Vampiric Tutor, Imperial Seal, Map, Expedition Map, that is, Mana Dorks, Bolt, Ancestral Recall, what else? Enlightened Tutor. There are just so many, like Cantrips even, Brainstorm. there's so many cards that like you just want to be able to counter, and like this just does it. It just gets them, you know. And yeah, and it's also just good against aggressive decks too, because I mean, if they just drop turn 1 Goblin Guide, I mean, you may not kill a guide on turn 1 because you may want to try to mise the land, and you may have burn, but Mental Misstep is just very, very strong. And I think in general, folks underplay it. Izzet Charm can be removal, can be a counterspell for non-creature spells, and can also just loot. Spell Pierce, or Spell Snare rather. 1 mana, counter any 2 is great, especially on the draw. Spell Pierce, great. And then Force Spike, just fine. In a deck like this, like they're going to generally have to react to the board, which means they're going to be tapping out as often as you're using your mana as well, unless they just want to dot. So anyways, guys, this is Izzet Tempo. I've had some pretty good success with the deck, and I'm going to go on a quick pause, and I'm going to cover some gameplay that I've had with the deck, and hopefully you guys are enjoying up to this point. Alright guys, we are back. I'm playing against Ben Wheeler here, and this hand's great. I did at this point know what Ben was playing, but I've been kind of building and testing on this deck for a bit, and I want to run it. I don't think it's per se a great matchup for him. He's on a blue-green Turbo Lands deck. So get a Monastery Sphere down turn 1, unless he has like the really fast spawn start, I'm probably going to be okay here. Attempts to cast on a Coiling Oracle. I just go ahead and Memory Lapse this. I'm kind of hoping he doesn't have more land. He apparently does not. So he's going to be redrawing that card. Go ahead and attack him here and leave up Force Spike to Force Spike the same card the next turn. Force Spike him and send him evidently to the Shadow Realm on this. Thing in the Ice is down to 3 counters. One of the issues is in this matchup specifically, is Thing in the Ice is going to be a little less effective due to the fact that I'm going to be the one probably presenting most of the threats. But by the time it flips, it's probably going to be a one-shot clock. Go ahead and fetch here, or not fetch, gush here, and just resolve a whole boatload of spells and buff up my Monastery Sphere. I can't prevent anything now. I'm kind of at the mercy of whatever he wants to do. He doesn't really have much to do it would seem. I'll go ahead and knock Ben down to 6 and say go. He cast a Growth Spiral, which is cool. He cast a Sylvan Scrying, finding Glacial Chasm, sacking one of his lands, I believe the Caracas here, which means that my attacks are going to be mitigated. I just go ahead and fetch here, find a Force of Negation, which is great. I suppose I could have tried to fetch for Force of Negation, Spell Pierce, or Snare on my turn to try to stop the Sylvan Scrying, because I was pretty sure that it was probably going to get a Glacial Chasm. I just go ahead and hard cast Force of Negation here. Bounce all my stuff. Now, I could play out the Monastery Sphere of the Legion War Boss. What I actually opt to do instead is just leave my mana. One, I can... actually, I can't. I can't draw into... I can't draw into the Remand right now. Metal Note would put it in my graveyard. But what I can do is at least pump fake him out. Like, I could have cast my threat just to be like, hey, I got a threat, but he knows I have a threat, and it's one hit to kill him. I go ahead and stifle the trigger on the Primeval Titan, cast out the Monastery Swiftspear, attack, cast out the Middle Note, which I'm ditching a blue card off the top, draw into a fetch land, which gives me pretty much perfect lethal. I'll hit him down to 2, play fetch land, fetch. He's in a force block situation on the prime time, and put him to -1. Alright, guys, so this is UG Fast Bond combo versus Blue-Red Tempo. I do think we have deck advantage in this matchup versus Ben. We are probably the more aggressive and more grindy kind of controlling deck, and I think in general his deck is going to have more powerful things to do, but less powerful things to do, if that makes sense. So he's going to have stuff like Growth Spiral, Sylvan Scryings, Coiling Oracles, all these kind of cards that really in and of themselves allow you to set up to do something big, but aren't doing something big. In this game, his big thing was just Primeval Titan, and the fact that I was able to stifle it meant he couldn't get a combo, which would probably be the Dark Depths combo, out of his deck, and he was in a force block situation against the Woken Horror. So he ended up, winning the game there. That said, it's kind of similar to I think Academy, most combo decks or decks that big ramp decks I think are going to struggle more so with this deck. Than more median type draw decks mid-range, aggressive decks, decks that have a lot of very consistent and similar cards are going to tend to do better against Tempo. Whereas when I have the ability to counter a couple spells while presenting a threat, I can choose what spells to do. And in this case, it's it didn't even really matter. I didn't have to counter that many spells in this game. I just had to counter a couple, and, the clock was enough to get the job done. Quick pause, guys. We'll be back momentarily for the second game in this match. Alrighty, guys, we are back. Alright, so this hand's fine. It's got a threat. It's got a gush if I can find another land. It's got a bolt to remove like a mana dork. I don't think he's running a ton of them. And it's got an Archmage's Charm to do, I don't know what, to do anything. It's a Swiss Army knife. So opponent plays a land here. I'm going to probably, he Mystical Tutors here. I go ahead and just resolve the Soulscar Mage. He finds a Sylvan Scrying, likely to find Strip Mine. This is another combo his deck can do. He can try to lock me out of lands. So I'm kind of playing on a tightrope here. Like, I really need to... So I play out my fetch land, right? Because this forces him to blow up my Fiery Inlet, which I can then sack to draw a card, which basically means he's going to eat up a bunch of his own tempo. I'm going to go back on mana, but my deck doesn't really require a ton of mana. I'm only running 30 lands. But the idea is that I can, find my... My guess is at this point, like, I kind of know, like, hey, he's probably got a Life from the Loam, or he's got, like, a card like Ramunap Excavator, where he's going to try to, like, just basically kill all of my lands. He could also have Crucible, but my guess is Loam. Like, I don't think he goes this route if he doesn't have Loam, because both those other cards are fairly fragile to counter Magic, whereas Loam is just going to require a counter every turn if I want to keep my lands. Which I do kind of want to keep my lands. Because I have Gush, I'm going to be able to kind of fight him on cards. And because he's blowing up a land every turn, the fact that I may have to go back lands is really not that big of a deal, because he'll be going back land every turn as well, if that's the tact he's trying to take here. So he goes ahead and plays Strip Mine. I fetch for the Volk, sack the Fiery Inlet to draw a card, and he is still at 2 lands. He ends up going ahead and casting Loam, gets back his fetch land plus the Strip Mine. I'm going to go ahead and just brainstorm here, looking to see if I can find anything relevant. I do find the Price of Progress, which is actually kind of semi-relevant. Now, I bold his face here. What I'm thinking is, it kind of makes sense to me to actually pressure him, because if he wants to continue to try to strip mine me out of the game, I think I'm okay with that. I do know that I have a Forked Bolt on top of my deck. And now the name of the game is going to be kind of just to, like, counter all of his Loams. So I'm going to attack with this card to see if he blocks. He does not. I go ahead and Impulse, find the Izzet Charm. The plan here is to allow him to recast Loam if he'd like. I do shrink down the Jati Offshoot as opposed to doming him down to 10. He's going to be gaining a lot of life with the Jati Offshoot. And now grazing a Gladeheart. Attempts to blow up my land with Strip Mine again. I just Gush on his turn. It's not typical that you Gush on your opponent's turn. It's kind of a weaker use of it. But because he's going back a land drop, and this is not Vintage where like he could have multiple Mox and still cast spells, I think it's fine to go back on lands here. I also have Force of Will at this point, which is pretty savagely good. So I am tapped out. I just go ahead and force this. Life from the Loam, so he's forced to draw it again. He puts out his Karakas, which is good for me. I'm glad to see Karakas because it means that my Price of Progress is just getting better and better. I want to see if I can get him to block here. He doesn't block. He's not going to either. That Jati Offshoot's doing some work for him. Gets back his Loam, attempts to Loam again. I just go ahead and negate this. Now, I'm not sure if I should have just mana leaked it. My thinking was this, like, if he has, like, 1 to 2 relevant cards, if he has 1 to 2 relevant cards remaining in his hand, my thinking is it's probably more intelligent to save the mana leak for, like, a Primeval Titan or, like, I don't know, a Thragtusk, whatever he might have. But I kind of misguess. Like, I think the rest of his hand's just nonsense. I keep on countering this thing. And now I'm kind of hoping to hit a land because I have this Jace the Mind Sculptor, and it would be nice to get Jace down and actually start winning the game. Because if he wants to strip lock me with a Jace in play, I think it's fine. He's not really going to progress too well with Jace because I'll find more lands. It's pretty easy to find a land every turn, especially if you're drawing 2 a turn off of Jace, and he hasn't presented a clock yet. I do 2-for-1 myself here on the Spell Pierce and the Mana Leak. Got about a 9 now, but he's gaining life every turn, roughly. Drawn to a counter spell. I'm like, alright, well, I guess I'm going to counter more Loams. The funny thing is, if you look at our deck sizes, like, we're both at 74 right now, so, like, despite him Loaming a bunch of times, like, and dredging a bunch, I've seen a ton of cards. So it may seem like I've seen a lot of counter magic, and I have, but I'm 26 cards deep in my deck right now, and I believe I run 20 plus counterspells in this deck. So it's not exceedingly crazy that I've seen that many. It's still a pretty high number, though. I'll go ahead and play Jace main 1 because I do want to get the buff on the Soulscar Mage, draw 3. And now I'm pretty much saying, like, hey, go ahead. You can try to strip block me if you want. But if you're spending all that mana to just, try to strip mine me, I don't think I'm too worried. You have to develop at this point. And he hasn't been drawing cards. He's been drawing Life of the Loam, which means that he hasn't really been developing his hand to have gas. So he has whatever gas he had like 6 turns ago. So we see an Oracle of Moldiah. Vapor Snag's pretty nice. I'm going to be able to win here. So I go ahead and Faithless Looting. Well, if he does not block. So I go ahead and Faithless Looting, get rid of the Ancestral Vision, which, as I said, kind of in the deck tech, can be worthless at certain points in the game. I just go ahead and flip this thing back, attack. He takes down to 4, and I just cast a Price of Progress, which kind of a while ago I said, this is the card I want to win with, and just win the game. So this was Blue-Green Turbo Lands versus Blue-Red Tempo. Be back momentarily, guys, for the next game in these matches. Alrighty, guys, we're back. Hand looks great. I'm playing against Jer White here. Jer is pretty renowned for playing blue decks, so I like this hand against the blue deck, and there's my threat. So I kind of have what I need. I have the tools I need to kind of get ahead. Now, this Gush is looking a little bit embarrassing right now because I do not have 2 islands. EOT, I'm going to go ahead and just fetch. I don't. Interesting. I do not fetch. I guess what's the point in fetching? It would just thin my deck out and not allow me to find another island. I think that's probably my rationale, or make my chances lower. I just go ahead and cast a Mystical Tutor here. Find Ancestral. What I'm going to do is force them to fight on their upkeep. I have a land drop for the turn. Basically, the name of the game, because it feels like we're playing in a mirror almost, is going to be to force them to fight me on their turn. Has a Wasteland. I think I make a play here. I think I probably should have just cycled the Miscalc here. Plays on a Delver. I go ahead and play out the Enigma Drake with Daze backup. He 4-spikes, which is pretty strong. I go ahead and Daze here. So now I have a 3-4, which means this Delver is not going to be getting through unless he can kill the Enigma Drake, even if it flips. Evidently finds a land or a Planeswalker of some variety. Plays out a Thing in the Ice. Good card. I'm going to end up leaving up Counter Magic here. I kind of want to develop a bit. Develop my mana a bit, that is. I don't really want to play a Legion War Boss into the face of a Thing in the Ice, especially with untapped mana. He'll probably counterspell, and then if he counters, I've lost my threat, and he's got to counter off his Thing in the Ice. That's one way to fight a Thing in the Ice, but what I'd rather do is just kind of develop my hand more. Get rid of irrelevant cards, and find more irrelevant ones. Attack in for 4. And have up, single counter plus the ability to dig through time. I believe I debate during the combat step digging through time here. I don't think I go for it yet. I think it's still kind of a bad time. I kind of want to make him bounce all the stuff on his EOT. That's kind of when I want to do it. I find my own Thing in the Ice, and this is worth casting out. If this causes a fight, I'll probably just allow it to happen. I'll just go ahead and cast this Gush, which will force him. It will likely cause him to actually want to fight over it. I remand his Gush. Use the Faithless Looting and sculpt my hand a bit. Attack for 7, down to 4. This is going to force him to want to bounce all the stuff, likely on my turn, because he doesn't run the risk of just dying to burn spells if he taps out on his turn to flip and try to attack. He cast a Hieroglyphic Illumination, which is going to flip all of the things and stuff. He has a 7-8 now. I go ahead and cast on a Vendilion Click to take a look at his hand. His hand consists of a couple threats that don't fly and some counter magic, and I've resolved 2 threats. He does a bunch of things and stuff, plays out a bunch of ground pounders, and he's dead. I do not put my Delver, which would have been nice. I find basically another Delver and Terramander. I go ahead and Forked Bolt, targeting the Delver of Secrets and his face to put him down to 3, and then attack for lethal with the Vendilion Click. Evidently, he did not find burn spells, and even if he had, I have a counter spell here if I need to fight over a kill spell for the Vendilion Click. But knowing Jer, if he had found burn, he would have done it on his turn while I was tapped out because it makes a lot more sense. But anyways, end up getting Jer here. really, Ancestral Recall, I think, is kind of what determined this game. If you look at both stacks, I mean, I am 3 deeper. He's at 77. I'm at 74. That initial Ancestral Recall gave me enough resources to, I think, get significantly further in my deck and kind of find what I needed to win in the matchup. Anyways, guys, quick pause. We'll be back momentarily for game number 2. All right, guys, back. This hand's acceptable. It's not the best tempo hand. It's going to have a tough time. It's going to have to come back from behind. Like, just looking at this hand, that's kind of a thing that you know it's going to have to do. And I was hoping he'd have, like, a 1-drop threat like Delver, so I could just mental misstep it. Unfortunately, it appears he has a 2-drop threat, which in this case is Greenwheel Liberator, which is a 4-3, which means that I can probably get it with my burn or with this Vendilion Clique, and I should be happy. So, we'll see what he gets up to on turn number 3 here. Hits me for 4, putting me down to 16. Plays on a Kyrian Dryad. I'm just going to counter this with Mana Leak. If he fights back with a 1-mana spell like Spell Piercer Snare, then I'll just mental misstep it. I am going to cast out my Vendilion Clique on my main phase here because I want it to resolve. I want a blocker for the Greenwalled Liberator. Cast Burst Lightning. I go ahead and mental misstep the Burst Lightning because I do want to block. He only has his 2 lands and a standstill in hand. So I'm pretty happy that like I'm going to be able to block this Greenwalled Liberator and then have the only threat on board with the Wandering Fumarole and make basically his card uncastable. Unfortunately, he draws into Dive Down, which is unfortunate because Dive Down is, well, one, I mean, it was a low prop draw that he drew, like, specifically he had to draw a removal spell or a pump spell to basically get me there. So it's unfortunate, but, you know, things happen. But at this point, I am going to be kind of boxed into wanting to block this Greenwall Liberator. We also know that he does not have great cards in hand. So the strategy I've taken here is actually a little deeper than it may seem. Like, what I've done is I've suspended Ancestral Vision, which means that I am going to be the first person to break Standstill. I don't really want to break Standstill now. What I want to do is this. I kind of want to put my opponent in a box. I want to, one, get rid of their onboard advantage to force them to have to play into the board again, and then once my Ancestral Vision gets down to 1 counter, I want to EOT a Mystical Tutor for Ancestral Recall. Then I want to recall on their EOT, force them to counter it. They likely will. Force them to counter the Ancestral Vision, and then play Jace the Mind Sculptor to establish a card engine/board control device on the board. That's kind of how I've opted to fight them. It's going to give them more looks, but it also gives me more looks at cards, and I'm a more mana light deck than they are because they're playing 3 colors and are forced to generally play more lands so that they can actually, you know, play the game of Magic. They go ahead and kill my thing, I kill their thing. We just trade here. I'm down to 4 lands, they're 5. I draw into Ancestral Recall anyways, so it's kind of nice. Now I have the option to try to cast this on their EOT to like get it to resolve, but I'd rather force them to interact with as much as possible at one point in time, so I'm not going to cast it on their EOT. I'm going to wait, and I'm going to cast it on this upcoming EOT right before the Ancestral Vision comes off the stack. But first I'm going to lead off on our Mystical Tutor, and I'm going to find Force of Will here. They don't do anything. So I'm going to allow Ancestral Vision to get countered first if they want to counter it. They don't, which is interesting to me. So I play out my land and say go. We both have 7 cards now. Basically, we traded off standstills. My standstill was Ancestral Vision. Theirs was a literal standstill. And I've still got this Ancestral Vision in hand that I can use when they have reduced their mana count on board. Basically, when they used up their mana to play stuff. So they start casting stuff. I cast an Ancestral Recall here to see if I can find a counter spell for this thing, because the Pteramander is going to be annoying. It'll be harder to kill. They cast out a Treasure Cruise. I allow them to do all this because their hand size is going to be their limitation at this point. And even though they've gushed and they have a ton of cards, they have to develop their board. Like, if they're going to have these many cards, they're going to be discarding or they're going to have to develop their board. So my assumption is they're just going to develop their board, which he does. He starts developing his board. But I have decent ways to interact with the board. Oh no. It looks like Moto failed. So he cast out another threat here. I forget what it was. He does not do that. He cast out another threat, and then what ends up happening is I Arc Trail and Searing Spear both of his threats. I believe it's a Delver plus a Pteramander. The game goes a bit longer, guys, but it seems that Moto has misremembered this game. I'm going to see if I can pause it and get back into this game and see if I can get this to work. This is actually a really cool game. It's kind of intricate in how it plays out. So 1 second, guys. I'll be right back. Alright guys, unfortunately that did not work out. It was a pretty cool game, but it doesn't seem like it's going to work. So we're playing against Croc here. I don't know what Croc's on. He was asking about Storm earlier, so there's a chance he's on that. Just playing my Izzet deck again. Plays out a Gitaxian Probe. I just go ahead and mental misstep this. to hide some information. I do have 2 cards that can counter things but are conditional, so I think it makes a little more sense to actually hide a little bit of information. See an island on top, go ahead and play out Scalding Tarn so I have a good fetch option if I draw a bad card or if I reveal a bad card to my Delver on the following turn. See Aether Spellbomb, which is an interesting one to see. Generally speaking means Storm or some sort of combo deck. Could be Eggs. Go ahead and find Censor, which is not a great card, but it is a card. Probably going to cycle it off if I don't have to counter a bunch of stuff on his turn. Go ahead and cycle it off here. Find a Faithless Eluding, which is not great. I don't really think it's great in this matchup. I assume I'm playing against combo. I kind of want to stay up on cards. Opponent, I believe, cycles off the Aether Spellbomb, EOT, fetches down to 9. So we've got him under a decent clock. 3 turns right now with multiple counter spells in hand. Opponent casts out Duress. Unfortunately, Duress is not Thoughtseize or Inquisition. I can't turn this around on my opponent, which I probably would do. Opponent gambles here, gets rid of Ill-Gotten Gains, casts a Black Lotus, squandered resources. I go ahead and Force Spike this to force them to pop their Lotus now. Basically to force them to go for it. They do have Demonic Tutor, which means they're going to be able to get off a Yawgmoth's Will, but this is their only Lotus activation. They have 3 mana, down to 2, and not enough mana to actually find the Tendrils, while still using the Lion's Eye Diamond to actually win. So put them in a spot where basically they just didn't have enough mana, despite, basically having... They had a really solid hand. So they had DT, Lotus, Ill-Gotten Gains, and Squandered Resources. Very, very solid. And gamble. So pretty strong hand, but fortunately we were able to kind of get there because we just tied up enough mana that they did not have quite enough to actually win the game. So quick pause, guys. We'll be right back momentarily for game number 2. All right, guys, back. And one thing to note from that last game, sometimes folks may look at not countering, but forcing an opponent to pay more mana as being bad with counter spells. But oftentimes there are cases where it is more correct to do that, to basically use your counter magic to buy tempo, to force tap out so they can't cast follow-on spells, etc. Get a Baral down. That's cool. I'm just going to blow up Baral now because they're playing Storm. It's pretty obvious, and I would prefer not to have all their stuff be cheaper. Get a Personal Tutor here. Personal Tutor finds Gamble. I just go ahead and blow this thing up. Take them off 1 mana. Now they can gamble, but they're down to 5 cards. They don't opt to gamble, which is interesting to me. So now I have an Archmage's Charm, which is kind of nice. And I also have Vendilion Clique up. I'll probably Clique on end step if they don't do anything. So opponent Impulse is here. And reveals Abeyance, Bolus of Citadel, Chain of Vapor, Desperate Ritual, Gamble, and Defense Grid. So I've got the threat on board. I have got the Misdirection if need be. I don't think it really does much right now. And I'm doing okay here. I'm pretty happy with where I'm at. I'm not going to play another threat. I'm just going to keep this one clocking them and use my counter spell up when I can. Miscalc, not a horrendous draw. Their strongest line is to find a way to get out Bolus of Citadel post Abeyance. So they gamble here. I just go ahead and counter this because I don't want them to find Lotus. The reason I counter this immediately is because if they find Lotus, it increases the options they have. Even if Lotus gets countered, if it's in their graveyard, it's a lot stronger than not being in their graveyard. Alright, finds Demonic Tutor and then passes. I believe I just EOT Snapcaster Mage to put them to lethal. Yeah. EOT Snapcaster on Lightning Strike. They Chain of Vapor my dude. Go ahead and hit them for 2 down to 1, which means that they cannot use their Mana Confluence, their City of Brass, or their Arid Mesa any longer, so I've killed 3 lands essentially. I'll go ahead and take a look at their hand again. I believe I don't think I get rid of anything. I think their hand doesn't do anything. They fetch and die. So Storm does not really have a great tempo matchup. I think in general it tends to be tempo's favor. You just present 1 to 2 threats, clock them out, kill them at EOT on their end step with Burn, and yeah. I think that tends to be kind of how it goes. Now, it's not impossible for Storm to win it, but Croc's also a newer Storm pilot, so, he's still learning the deck, and, we had some advantage there. I think we also do have a little bit of deck advantage against a Storm deck as well. Anyways, guys, quick pause. Be back momentarily for one last game. Alright, guys, we're back. Playing against Paranundarks here. This hand looks fine. I don't know what I'm playing against, but it looks fine. Paranundarks plays on a Tomb, which could mean medium something, but no, this appears to be like an Academy deck, maybe PO Academy. Defense Grid's really good against my deck, but what are you going to do, right? So I do have this Dak Faden, which means I can steal an artifact next turn. Golos is going to find probably Tolarian Academy. When it finds Minamo, I know that he likely has Tolarian Academy in hand already, because typically speaking, it would find Academy. Cycle off my Censor, it's not going to do anything this game. End up playing out the Dak Faden, steal the Golos, so I can start clocking my opponent. Also, the plan is here, if he has another creature, I'll Vapor Snag it, plus play the Goblin Rabblemaster to pump the Dak Faden up to 2 and then steal whatever creature he replays out the turn after if he does that. At least it prevents that line of play from him if he has like a random Worm Coil engine. I doubt he does. I'm going to attack for 4. I'll play out the Grim Lavamancer here. Opponent plays out a Mindslaver, which is bad for me because there's a Vapor Snag and onboard Grim Lavamancer. I just drew Ancestral Recall, which went to my opponent. This is a horrendous beating. I used my deck to help himself draw. Lavamancer's my Goblin Rabblemaster, and I'm left with 2 power on the board. So I'm pretty dead. This is a very solid draw for my opponent, though. They basically had like all the big mana tools that they could possibly want. Time Spiral, and I'm pretty dead here. I do have Force of Will, but Force of Will is irrelevant because there's a Defense Grid on board. I just ask him at this point, hey, do you have it in hand with the rings? And he says, yes, I do. And I'm like, okay, cool, you got me. So when they have these fast draws like this, like you can still just die. I mean, like it's kind of like playing against an aggressive deck at this point. Like if they have everything they need to combo and they're and you're on a slower draw or on a draw that's more well suited to play against like control or mid range. You're going to have some issues. But knowing what I'm playing against now allows me to make more informed mulligan decisions, and going into Game 2, we'll see how we end up faring. Alrighty, guys, back. Yeah, this hand is weird, right? Like, I think you keep this hand, but I don't like it. I really do want red mana to kind of get my threats going. I don't draw red mana on the first turn with my Gitaxian Probe, but I see my opponent's hand. My opponent's hand's also not very good, and they mulliganed, I believe. It's not great. So I'm not going to brainstorm quite yet. I would like to find a fetch land before I do it, and I would also like to memory lapse whatever they play here off of the Mana Vault. Unfortunately, they also have Voltaic Key, which is something I can't allow to resolve, so I'll start drawing 2 a turn with Sensei's Dividing Top. So I am going to go ahead and brainstorm here, find a bunch of blue mana. I'm not in a great spot here, so like I am kind of got my back against the wall because I kind of kept a greedier hand. Not kind of, I did keep a greedier hand. I wanted to see how it would work out, and it's really not panning out because I did not find red mana. I know I'm drawing 2 red cards off the top over the next 2 turns. I have a counter spell to get their next most relevant thing, which in this case is going to have to be Voltaic Key, because Voltaic Key makes mana and it makes cards off the Sensei's Dividing Top. But I also know that like unless their top deck is going to provide them with good answers, their opening hand was not great. Inventor's Fair is also something that I can answer with Nimble Obstructionist if required. So I have a few things that I can actually still do here, but it's not looking good for me. And their life total is at least staying even. They play out a Signet, or a Talisman, rather. I draw into my Rabblemaster, which I knew was on top, so I still have 4 uncastable cards in my hand. Not good. And I believe this is the turn that I end up casting out the Nimble Obstructionist. They cast on a Future Sight, and I say, well, I probably should have done this last turn, but I wanted to leave open the option to stop the Inventor's Fair. We know that they're drawing into a Time Spiral. I just go ahead and dig through time here to try to find a Force of Will or a Pact of Negation. I end up finding Spell Pierce, which is not horrible. Actually, Spell Pierce is pretty good here. If they don't like go Boku mana next turn, like I can possibly Spell Pierce this Time Spiral, which is nice. They draw into the Spiral, have a dual or a fetch land on top. Go ahead and resolve the Everflowing Chalice where X equals 2, or it's multi-kick twice. And take another look. So at a minimum now I have red mana, so if I want to resolve this Rabble Master, I can, or I can brainstorm with the Direfleet Daredevil. So what I end up doing is this. I find the Brainstorm, cast Mystical Tutor to find Force of Will, Brainstorm into Force of Will, Gush, and Ancestral Recall. Basically the best 3 cards in my deck I found. So I get very lucky here. I find Ancestral Recall, Gush, Force of Will, which is just pretty absurd. I mean, the Force of Will we knew we were going to get, but finding essentially a 5 for 1 staple on 2 cards was pretty good. 5 for 2 is not bad. Well, at this point I believe Moto freezes up. It appears it has. Maybe not. Yeah, no, Moto did something hinky here. So what ends up happening is this, guys. I don't replay the island, and I replay the Volcanic Island. I resolve the Monastery Swift Spear, leaving up 1 blue mana in order to hardcast the Spell Pierce. Attack them for 4 damage, down to 10. On the following turn, they cast the Mindslaver out. Eventually, I counter it with Force of Will. Cast Ancestral on my turn, cast Lightning Strike on my turn, buffing up the Monastery Swift Spear to a 3/4, and win the game. So unfortunately, Moto has misremembered. These games are fairly complicated due to the tutoring and the large amounts of card draws. So I assume we may see more issues than Moto trying to remember games. But I do end up winning this one. I do think I got very lucky. The dig through time was clutch. As was the Mystical Tutor into the Brainstorm out of my opponent's yard to find Ancestral Recall, Gush, and Force of Will, which we knew about because we Mystical Tutored it. But on the whole, we managed to find a line with really what was probably a suboptimal keep on our part. All right, guys, quick pause. We'll come back for game number 3 against Paranundrox on Paradoxical Outcome Academy. Alrighty, guys, so back. This hand is not great, but it's acceptable. Alright, opponent mulligans down to 5, which is rough. I'm just going to play out my land and tell them to go. They did not fetch on their turn, which means they're going to be vulnerable to this Stifle in my hand, which I get them with. I like Stifle in this matchup because it actually does get a significant bit of things. Like, it gets the map. I just go ahead and fetch here. I'm going to cast the Latinum's Legacy right now, getting rid of one of my basics from my hand. Go ahead and find Serum Visions and another land, a non-basic land. Just go ahead and Serum Visions here. Put both on bottom. I don't want Chain Lightning in this matchup. It's too slow. The problem with this hand is it doesn't have a threat. I take a risky line here. I just remand this, and they don't have another land. So I get lucky. They didn't find the land they needed. But my hand is not great right now. I'm going to try to censor this Soul Ring next turn, and hopefully they don't draw into a land. If they do, well, they're going to go up quite a bit on mana. Play on Soul Ring. I go ahead and censor it. And they're still down to just 1 Darksteel Citadel, and now a Mox Opal. Find a Jace the Mind Sculptor. Top them. Put the Ancient Tomb on the bottom. They do nothing again. I actually should have activated Grim Lavamancer, but I think I was in the middle of a phone call at the time and failed to do so. Find a Terramander. Go ahead and just throw a burn at their face. And leave up the Grim Lavamancer plus activation on Terramander to become a 5/5. Which puts them not at a 2-turn clock, but pretty close to a 2-turn clock. If they don't find a land this turn, they're just going to die. And they go ahead and pack it in. So, guys, I'm going to go ahead and cut it there. This has been Blue-Red Tempo in a variety of different matchups. I hope you guys enjoyed all of the games and the deck tech and theory of play on the deck. It's essentially a straddle build between Izzet Blitz and Blue-Red Moon. It does not run the Moon effects to include Blood Moon, Back to Basics, and Magus of the Moon, but instead complements like that general strategy, of counter magic, interactive burn, and lock pieces with a much heavier clock. But not to a point that it becomes Blitz, where it's really more of like an all-in kind of attack deck. But it still kind of has elements of both, so it gives you as a pilot a lot more range of decision-making in how you want to play the deck in a variety of different matchups. In the matchups that were showcased here, against, generally speaking, combo and other control builds, I tend to think this deck will do fairly well. Where it will tend to struggle is against like red deck wins, against like white weenie, against most aggressive decks. Even 3-color aggressive decks can be challenging. I played one match against like tribal vampires and just lost resoundingly to like a Cavern of Souls, and it was just rough. And I think it was that and Caracas, like they're bouncing like an Olivia, a bunch of times, and they had a bunch of legendary vampires, so it was tough. But yeah, like the hyper aggressive decks will tend to beat tempo, but everything else tends to be pretty fair game. Tends to be pretty good against most other things, and I think in general it can punish the combo pretty well as long as you understand how the specific combination deck you're playing against operates and how best to stop it. So I hope you guys enjoyed this video content on Blue-Red Tempo, and yeah, we'll be back relatively soon, hopefully with more content of value. Alright guys, take care and enjoy.